name is Ellen Zwarnstein. I'm the executive director at the Michigan Center for Civic Education, where we also oversee We the People for our state. Your judges are here, and before we get to them real quick, I want to make sure there was somebody that just entered the waiting room and want to know if they should be in the room. Their name is Bob.
Yeah, that's Bob Odell, the New Jersey State Coordinator. So you can let him in.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, judges, if you could introduce yourselves, they'll ask you, the students, to introduce yourselves afterwards, and then we'll begin with the hearing.
Sounds awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Ann Zinkin. I will be your Chief Justice for this session. I am a career law clerk at the New Hampshire Supreme Court. I've been here for about 21 years. Prior to that, I litigated employment cases in San Francisco. I have been judging at the state level for somewhere between 5 and 10 years. I spent a good part of my formative years in New Jersey, so you have a warm place in my heart. And I turn it over to my fellow judges.
Hello, it's Hank Chambers down here at the University of Richmond, law professor down here, and I've been doing a whole lot of stuff with We the People for a couple decades, so it's good to see y'all.
That's where I want to go to school. I might commit there.
Fabulous. Then when you come on down here, I expect you to come see me.
Oh, of course I will.
Absolutely. So it's good to see you all. It's also good to see the name of Alan Broadman, but that's all right. We'll just leave that for later.
Good afternoon. I'm Barry Anderson. I'm an Associate Justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. I'm the Senior Justice on the court. That doesn't mean anything. It just means I've hung around for a very long period of time. But prior to my involvement here as a national judge in this competition, which I've done for many years, I was also an assistant coach for a team from Hutchinson, Minnesota that actually went to the national tournament several times running. And I know all about all the effort you put in, all the long evenings and the hard work, and now the stress about worrying about what kind of off-the-wall questions you're going to get from 3 judges. But we're going to have a great conversation. I promise you that. We're looking forward to it, and I'm delighted to be part of your afternoon.
If you could introduce yourselves, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Shrestha.
Hi, my name is Alexandra.
Hi, I'm Safdar.
Hi, I'm Rihanna.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Marlena, and this is our advisor, Mr. Mondry.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So we are here for Unit 4, and we are doing question 2. After I read the question, you should feel free to start your presentation. Members of Congress are not only legislators, but they are also inquisitorial and should meet frequently to inspect the conduct of the public officers. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory power? Explain the differences, if any, between Congress's power to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? How effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers? You may begin at any time.
Congress has been somewhat effective in utilizing their investigative powers while checking the executive branch's acts of misconduct, but has overstepped boundaries by investigating private citizens. In 1923, Albert Fall leased the U.S. Naval Petroleum Reserve at Teapot Dome to an oil company. The Senate panel investigated and prosecuted Fall for his acceptance of bribes. In 1973, the Senate Watergate Committee was created to investigate the break-in at the DNC's headquarters. This effectively addressed the executive branch's clear abuse of power by starting Nixon's impeachment process.
Congress has also effectively used its investigative powers to check the legislative branch. Recently, Congress has opened an investigation into Representative Matt Gaetz because he's allegedly engaging in sexual acts with an underage girl. What has not yet been resolved, this is clearly an effective use of investigative power. This is a serious claim that must be looked into. Congress has also been overzealous with their power, using it to investigate private citizens. In 1938, the House Un-American Activities Committee was created to investigate communist groups of citizens to attack the First Amendment by persecuting people for their beliefs.
Congress's power of oversight includes its power to investigate, making its oversight powers a broader check on the executive branch. The power to investigate is the most active form of congressional oversight, where they directly obtain information respecting the conditions in which they are intended to affect or change, as stated by Justice Van Devanter. Congressional oversight includes investigative power in addition to monitoring the president, impeachment proceedings, and budgetary review. Congress's power of oversight allows the legislative branch to review the works of the executive branch beyond investigations.
These powers include advising the president with appointments and treaties under Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, restricting an agency's funding and regulating an agency's authority. The necessary and proper clause only implies that Congress has investigative powers, but in McCrane v. Daughtry, it is stated that the power of inquiry with the process to enforce it is an essential and appropriate auxiliary to the legislative function, explicitly granting Congress this power.
Congressional oversight has been partially effective in monitoring the actions of the executive branch, but sometimes fails to change actions when necessary. The more passive and prevalent form of congressional oversight, fire alarm oversight, which involves citizens and interest groups bringing problems into the legislative branch, has helped serve as warnings for when the executive branch needs to change their actions. For example, a Freedom of Information request by Vice News showed that there were top secret national security information leaks by CIA Director Panetta to screenwriters of Zero Dark 30 from 2011, showing extreme misconduct within the executive agency. Moreover, in 1997, the IRS brought whistleblower reports to Congress, alerting them of agents who were pressured by supervisors to harass citizens. This led to the Internal Revenue Service Restructuring and Reform Act of 1998 being passed.
On the other hand, police patrol oversight is another form of congressional oversight, which is more active, direct, and involves a much greater presence of congressional members. For instance, the Inspector General Act of 1978 required that within each executive branch agency lie an independent watchdog Office of Inspector General designed to eliminate sources of fraud and report misconduct to Congress. In conjunction, these two methods allow for Congress to effectively use their oversight power as the police patrol oversight method is more effective, but due to its time-consuming nature is far more expensive. Whereas the fire alarm policy, which is far cheaper, enables congressmen to spend less time on oversight, leaving more time for other productive activities, as much of the cost for fire alarm oversight is borne by citizens, interest groups, administrative agencies, and courts who sound alarms themselves rather than Congress.
Oh, thank you very much. Now I'm unmuted. You mentioned that you thought that Congress oversteps its bounds when it investigates private citizens and that it acts appropriately when it investigates public officials. Well, what happens when the public official is accused of criminal behavior? In that context, does Congress overstep, meaning usurping some executive function by investigating? And should it cede that power to the prosecutorial function of the executive branch?
I don't personally believe that Congress oversteps its boundaries in this case because I think that there has to be some sort of, they need to take some sort of responsibility for what happens within their own branch. And by investigating their own members, it shows that they're taking accountability and responsibility for what goes on within members of the legislative branch. And if we gave it off to the executive branch, while it would represent the checks and balances which are meant to be upheld by American ideals, I think it would sort of it would take off the accountability of the legislative branch and allow them to just have the executive branch figure out what's happening, what's incorrect, and then have them take over.
To go off of Safner's point and to also go back to what you were saying, you mentioned that there is this difference between a private citizen and someone who is a member in government. And so I do think that once you become this member of government, that your actions are closely monitored, not only by the people, but by also the other people in your government, and that you're always going to be watched to see what you're doing. And this isn't really a new concept. And I do think that it is just to go off of Safner's point, because if you have come into this role, you have to be prepared to do like the responsibility that comes with it.
So I understand why Albert Fall was investigated for Teapot Dome. That was malfeasance in office. Why is Matt Gaetz's private behavior relevant to Congress?
I think this kind of relates to what Marley and Safner were saying in the last question. That is, as a representative of the US government and of Congress, it's important for Matt Gaetz to uphold something by having sexual misconduct with someone that is underage, that is extremely inappropriate. By being a member of Congress, he has to uphold being appropriate and not and upholding standards.
I think it's important to all. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
Okay, I think it's also important to note that when you're a public official, you're in the eyes of the public, not only in America, but also in other countries, and that casts a bad light on America as a whole because you are representative of every citizen. And also, just Matt Gaetz' acts were just a blatant example of moral turpitude where it was just not a virtuous thing to do.
Okay, so if they find something, what's Congress going to do to him or with him? Are they just going to send their findings over to the Department of Justice, or are they going to do something else with them?
I think Congress needs to take the first step here, take the charge. It is their own member who is accountable for these disturbing acts. And I think instead of pushing it off first to the Department of Justice, they need to look into it themselves with their oversight, and they need to investigate and then do what they feel to hold them accountable and not push it off to somebody and say, well, our member of Congress, he's at fault here, but let's just give it to somebody else to deal with. They need to, first of all, take themselves, take it head on.
If the accusations about Matt Gaetz are found to be true after this investigation, I think Congress should pursue the same path for what they did with Representative Green after old videos of her saying anti-Semitic phrases resurfaced, and I think he should be stripped of his congressional committees, just like her.
So some have argued that Congress has ceded to the executive and judicial branch some of its power, and that this has interfered with its ability to conduct oversight and investigations. Assuming that to be true, you don't have to agree with that. Tell me that if that's the case. But assuming that to be true, how does Congress go about recapturing the power that it has ceded to the executive and judicial branches?
I really think the best way for Congress to get its power back is for the people to elect representatives that they feel really capture what they want in a Congress. Because when the people are on your side, then you really just have all the power because we are a popular sovereignty-based nation.
I'm not sure if there's exactly one way for Congress to get its power back, because as we've seen over the years, the executive branch especially has become a lot more powerful, especially considered what the framers intended for the executive branch to be able to do. But now I think that the main thing Congress should focus on is not giving up any more power and using its power appropriately and investigating and using its oversight powers towards the executive branch properly to ensure that whatever power they lost isn't abused by the executive branch so that they can prevent further abuses from occurring.
Are there any limits to the congressional power of oversight and inquiry? And if there aren't any limits, should there be?
The simple limits are that it's quite, they can't do it at all times, oversight especially, because they only have a certain amount of money to spend and they can't put it all towards like watching over the executive branch at all times. They do have their watchdogs within branches of Congress, and then also they passed the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993, which they wanted the executive agencies to consult with Congress when like developing strategic plans. So I don't really think there's been like any strict limits placed upon their oversight branch, upon their oversight power, but they've used it in a way so that they have to work with the executive branch to see if there are any abuses occurring, and they place their own members there. But the only like limits that are on the oversight, in my opinion, are the ones that Congress has placed on themselves by the amount of money or the amount of time they need to spend.
I agree with their staff there. I think the only limits Congress is putting on themselves is they just need to be smart with what they're going to be investigating. Don't abuse their investigations. With something big, something large comes up and they're going to investigate it, they should investigate it. They shouldn't feel compelled by their money or feel blocked by that if something serious is going on. It's just a matter of them deciding what they're going to look into and if what they're looking into is going to be worth their time.
So given that that the Inspector General law requires that the Inspector General send stuff to Congress, even small stuff. Has Congress already guaranteed that it will be looking at small stuff and not just big stuff?
Yeah, especially because after what Office of Inspector General was created within it, they had the Reports Consolidation Act of 2000. So the OIGs actually are the ones who have to identify and report the serious issues so that Congress doesn't have to spend their time on really minute, minor sort of things, and they can focus on the larger aspects that come up within the oversight.
I think that's our time. Thank you so much. I really appreciated this conversation. I thought that, I think this is a really tough question. And I thought that you did a solid job. And I can tell that you did a lot of good thinking about it. I'll throw it open to my colleagues. Professor Chambers.
Sure, I'll jump in. Good stuff, good start, good opening statement. I think y'all did a lot of good work on Q&A. I would be remiss if I did not mention the discussion about Matt Gaetz. Here's the thing. You gave us red meat, you gave us Matt Gaetz. Here is the problem with Matt Gaetz. That's not a check on the executive, right? So a lot of what you talked about in your opening, which was exactly right, the Matt Gaetz investigation, not a check on the executive. And as a consequence, when we had discussions in Q&A, it was time that y'all spent not really getting into the issues that you wanted to get into. Other piece of the puzzle, and I say this because who knows, maybe you'll see this question again if you guys happen to end up on Monday. When we ask what is it that Congress can do, think about what you want Congress to do. You've told us that it is a horrible thing that Gaetz has done, allegedly done, whatever. You've told us it's a horrible thing he's done. What can Congress do to its own members? They can expel their own members if necessary. I hear you about Marjorie Taylor Greene, but you've set up Matt Gaetz as being a horrible person in a way that Marjorie Taylor Greene's a little bit different. So you may want to think about, all right, what does the Constitution give me in terms of what Congress can do? In that same vein, when you're talking to Justice Anderson about the question about getting power back, you took us all the way to the edge and told us about power of the purse and told us about passing new laws. If Congress wants to get its power back, it may want to think about using the tools it already has under the Constitution to get that power back if possible. So you guys have done a ton of thinking. I want you to take that last step and say, what is it that Congress has the power to do under the Constitution? Whatever they have the power to do, go do it. But good stuff all the way around. Because like I said, you guys thought a lot about this stuff, which is no real surprise. Good job.
Yeah, I agree with much of what's been said here. And on the question that I raised, that the professor's done a great job of sort of analyzing. Your response, I mean, you have a couple different ways you can go with that. One would have been to say, here's a laundry list of things that can be done. You could pass a legislation that doesn't defer to the secretary to issue rules and regulations, or can pass legislation that requires the executive branch to report at periodic intervals or to take other action. The question, of course, arises whether any of that stuff's going to help. And the approach that you took, which I think is perfectly acceptable, is to say, I'm not sure we can fix that problem, but what we can do is not make it any worse. And I thought that was an acceptable way to approach the problem. This question of the Congress becoming more performative and less interested in legislation, in a prior era, you would have a whole chunk of the legislature that was deeply involved in passing legislation and knowledge of the Senate rules. Now you have more of an emphasis on giving speeches from the Senate floor and widely witnessed by nobody. And so, there's something going on there. And I think we need to get a handle on that. I appreciated your reference to the fact that the House Un-American Activities Committee actually comes into being. People assume this is a post-World War II matter. It really comes into being before that. And I think many people would not have been aware of that. And I also appreciated your reference to the Inspector General Act of 1978. That's a level of sophistication on these kinds of questions that is pretty unusual. So I thought it was good, and you know, I wish you well in the remainder of the day, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you all very much.